Well, welcome everybody to Documenting Program Practices. Glad to have you with us today as we talk about this very important component of writing your QAR, your Quality Assurance Report, otherwise known as your self-study. I'm Christine DeGregory. I serve as AAQEP's Director of Professional Learning, and I have with me Karen Lowenstein, who serves as our amazing Director of Member Services. So thanks for being with us today, Karen. We have a pretty short agenda for today. We're going to talk about sharing your program practices, what that actual documentation and evidence of program practices might take shape of in your self-study, and then of course always time for questions. I do want to remind you that we have a part 1 to this webinar, which we did record last week, so you should be able to go to the website and find that copy. And that's really about making your case. That gets into the nitty-gritty of talking about how you're providing your evidence and what those data tables and whatnot might look like, and just the general architecture of the self-study itself, and some good tips to kind of keep your reader reading. So today we're not going to venture into any of that. We're really going to focus on how you're documenting the evidence of your program practices in your self-study to continue to effectively communicate your case for quality. So here we go. First, we're going to start with our expectations framework. We're going to look to the right-hand side of our foursquare where it says program practice, right? This is where we're going to delve in today in some very specific ways. Now, as you recall, we've already talked about how to make the case for quality in our QAR outline here on the left-hand side. Today, we're really focusing on what we've been calling the appendices. And those are very important because they provide evidence for very specific aspects of standards 3 and 4. So let me show you exactly what those are. So on the left-hand side, you can see the appendices names. And then on the right-hand side, the aspect or aspects for which they support. So it's really important that you make this connection right now, that you're not writing the appendix divorced of your narrative. It gives evidence, very important evidence for specific aspects. And this is important to hang on to for today. So I need to give you a little history. Here at AAQEP, you know we are always improving together. So when we originally set forth with the working committee that put together the expectations framework and they thought about the design of the self-study, they said, well, if we have these appendices, which you just saw on the previous slide, these are going to be a great way for people to share what they're doing, right? They're portable. They're these little, however many pages of this is how we follow up with our candidates and completers and support them once they become teachers of record in the field. Or this is how we attend to data quality. These are our routines and cycles and the ways that we've approached this work. But as you know, in practice, things have kind of changed a little bit, right? And it ended up being that the evidence for those particular aspects became isolated from the narrative because folks just focused on talking about them in the appendix. And so we thought, well, this isn't going as planned. So we've done a little improvement, we hope. And right now it's being piloted with some folks who are actually working with our template that's brand new in our accreditation management platform, which you might hear me refer to as the AMP. Now, just to know, beginning in fall of 2025, so imagining most of you are writing a self-study that's beyond that date, right? You must, we have very few musts and requirements here in AAQEP, but you must submit your self-study using the template in the AMP. And so we thought this is a great time to kind of work on this redesign and see how things go. And so we've embedded the work of what was in those appendices that kind of put at the support. Now, there's one exception to this, and that happens to be for data quality. And that's because there were two appendices that were supporting one aspect. It was a very, very rich aspect, and I'll show you that in a minute. All right, can everybody still hear me okay? My internet's telling me I'm unstable. I want to make sure we're still all good as we're proceeding. Okay. So if you're wondering, where did my appendices go, right? It doesn't look quite the same. This is the template that you'll see in the AMP. And I'm just going to pause for a minute so you can take this visual in, and then I'll start talking again. So what you see here are all of the sections of the QAR, but they're pieced out in these little heat map buttons. So it makes it really clear what you need to address where. So if you look at our appendices, if you think, well, I know we had 5 appendices, they're still all represented here, but now you'll see, right, the curriculum matrix portion of Appendix C actually belongs to aspect 3A, because that's about, do you have coherent curriculum aligned to state and national standards, right? You'll see Appendix A now resides in 3D, Appendix D in 3E, and so on and so forth, with, again, data quality being its own little button at the end of Standard 3, all right? What does this mean for you? It means you're still doing the same work you're doing. You're not changing course. You're not doing any of that, right? Given these our 2018 standards and the way things are aligning here, you're still doing the same thing. You're just moving it from the back of your self-study into the specific aspect. All right. Now, looking ahead, I have my little crystal ball there, right? You all know that we have standards that are going to be adopted, hopefully very soon, and approved by our board of directors come this December. So just a reminder, beginning in 2027, everybody needs to use the new standards, all right? But for those of you before then, you still have that wiggle room. If you're in 2026, that's our flex year. You can use the 2018 or the 2025. So I just want to make sure you're being aware of this. What does this mean for the new standards, though? The architecture, that template is going to be the same thing. We're not going to throw appendices at the end. The program practices that you need to dig into, you will still do so within the narrative. Now, they might shift a little bit because I don't, if you've looked at the draft standards, some things have kind of moved, but in general, the approach is going to be the same. So just want you to keep that in mind. I want you to just kind of take a moment and be like, it's going to be okay. We got this. All right, now let's get into why you're really here today, that documentation and evidence of program practices. So the program practices that we ask you to tell us about span these 5 topics, right? We begin with candidate recruitment, admissions, monitoring, and support. This is candidate focus, right? We switch to program focus when you dig into your internal quality controls, which answers, how do you know the system is operating successfully, right? Are your policies being implemented in the way that you expected them to be? Then you move into the evidence of data quality. So how have you attended to data quality? Because you need to have credible data to inform your decisions about your program. You dig into your program capacity and institutional commitment, meaning, do you have the capacity and resources to do your work over this interim of the accreditation cycle? And finally, my favorite, because it's standard 4, and I love standard 4 because that's where all the innovative things happen, completer support and follow-up. This is so dependent upon your context, and we'll dig in more into that, but I just get really excited about this, this element of program practices. So we're going to dig into each of those. So we're going to begin first with your program practices successfully supporting candidates. So remember, this is tied to aspect 3D, right? How are you recruiting, admitting, monitoring, and supporting your candidates throughout their time with you? And of course, this is all aligned to your state requirements and any professional standards. So the focus here is from start to finish on the candidate. Remember, this is candidate focused, right? And you are looking to evaluate the effectiveness of your system, and you're going to do some describing of what this whole cycle looks like. So I'm going to chunk this into 3 pieces here. So you're going to see 3 of these slides. So the first one is all about recruitment, selection, admissions. Well, how do you tell your story about this, right? Well, you start at the very beginning. You're going to do some description, right? What are you doing to recruit your students or your candidates? Are you going to job fairs? Are you going to other departments and saying, hey, can we sit in on X, Y, and Z and let your STEM majors know that if you don't want to end up in a lab, 18 hours a day, you can always become a teacher, right? Whatever that might be. Grow your own programs that you've established. Maybe your work with your own internal institutional admissions office or career counselors, right? So explain, what are you doing? How are you getting those candidates in? Where are you going? Then talk about what's your selection criteria. For some, you have very strict state requirements that you must abide by. You have your own program requirements. What are those, right? Are you offering variances? Can you? What kind of latitude do you have? And then finally, you're going to provide data. This is the part that seems to kind of fall by the wayside in not only this work on how you're supporting your students, but also in a couple of the other focus areas of program practices. So talk about who has been admitted, what is the demographic of that student population, and who accepts, right? Give a clear picture of who your candidates are. Right? Are they first gen? Are they coming from a low socioeconomic background? Are you looking at gender diversity, right? If you don't pay attention to things, you can't attend to them. So next, you've got these wonderful candidates in the pipeline. How are you making sure that they are all succeeding as they progress through the program? Well, you have to have some monitoring points to figure that out. And so think about when you're looking at monitoring your candidates, are they all successfully navigating the program in the same way? How do you know that all your students are being successful? It's not enough to say, well, we know they're successful because they're all getting recommended for licensure at the end of the program. You got to dig in. Right? You need to ensure that throughout the way that however you're slicing and dicing your student population, it could be by modality of program delivery, it could be by some type of demographic characteristic, it could be by licensure area, right? Your early childhood versus your adolescent. Whatever it might be, however you're looking to see if there are any disparate outcomes, right? How do you know all those groups are being successful throughout the way? So in action, we've seen folks conduct a discrepancy analysis and look at, well, who's not being successful? Maybe it's those candidates who have not completed the program and you are digging in. Was there something that we should have been doing in recruitment and admissions differently? Should we have stepped in sooner in monitoring in some way? And what can you learn about these folks? Or maybe you follow a cohort of students throughout the program. We have some programs that are so small, they just take the whole group of candidates for that year group and follow them through their entire time with the program. So what might this look like for you? So this is just a sample, right? You might call them gateways, benchmarks, gates, I don't know, whatever kind of name you might throw on these things, but you know you have phases through your program where, kind of like Monopoly, right? If you don't do X, Y, and Z, you do not pass go, right? You're not collecting your $200. So what are those gateways where you know you're looking at those candidates and ensuring that they're ready to move on? Remember, we have those candidates that sometimes need another little field placement before they get into student teaching, right? What are those things that you're looking to make sure that candidates are well equipped to move on to the next level? So you can see you might be using grades, you might be using advisor or counseling meetings. That's a quick, are they meeting those? Have they finished those big work samples or observation hours or the types of observation hours they needed to get in? Whatever it might be, you're determining that, right? And so that's what you're looking at. And you can say, okay, are candidates being successful here by the time we get to end of benchmark 1? Yes. But then something happens in benchmark 2, right? Woohoo! Like all of a sudden they've fallen off, they're straight and narrow and their grades have just gone down. Why? What's going on, right? That kind of thing. All right. So this is the fun part. this is where you get to figure out the support part, right? And many of you already have these systems in place, and you do a great job in your self-studies explaining what those are, right? What are our monitoring processes? Well, we have this kind of referral system for candidates if they start showing up to class later, they're not turning on their assignments, like thinking maybe at the disposition level, right? What are those things that you're looking at? But again, and then what are you implementing to support them? Do you mandate some kind of, okay, we're going to set up a plan, right? We're going to get together and you're going to meet with your advisor weekly until we make sure that you are back on the path you need to be on, whatever it is. And of course, sometimes it also means counseling out, right? As much as we want them to, sometimes it's just not a good fit, right? And that's okay too. But what are those pieces and what are the supports that you have to help your candidates all be successful? And the most important thing, just like when you're looking at your qualitative and quantitative data, is sharing what did you learn from these investigations about how you're supporting recruiting all the way through completion your candidates, and what might you need to adjust just a little bit based on those investigations to go ahead and improve the overall quality, right, for that experience for them. All right. So 3D, again, we just talked about candidate success, right? Are you successfully and appropriately supporting your candidates? We're going to switch now to your program's success, meaning your system success. Is your system operating as you intended it to? And sometimes I really find grounding myself, in the student versus the system is the way to really help understand what these two program practices, what you need to do in terms of describing them. So how are your systems operating? So for 3E, which is the aspect that this work supports, 3E's focuses on that internal quality assurance system, and obviously always with a lens towards continuous improvement and good data. We're going to ignore the good data now because we're going to get to that in the data quality one next. So our focus is, have you been able to demonstrate your program's capacity to monitor and maintain quality, and of course, always engaging in continuous improvement? Most often, folks take an audit-based approach to this. So we've got two options here: a broad-based audit, which you take 10 to 20 program completers. Now, if you, again, are a small, not very complex program, you might take your whole cohort and do this with. For other folks, if you have multiple types of programs, you would want to purposely sample and make sure you have representation from each. Other folks do a focused approach to this work where they've already identified a problem and they want to dig in, and you can go through and say, okay, this is what we did and this is the data, right? These are the results of what we did in terms of making some improvements. But I'm going to focus on the broad-based approach for you all today. So what do you need to do in your self-study? Well, you give an overview, right? What are the policies and practices that ensure that your system is operating as it should, right? Sample those completers and audit the system. As I mentioned, you sample purposefully, and this is a great time to get some stakeholders involved. I had one provider, they're a rather small program, and I believe they had a program, nearby principal, somebody who, I don't know if they were, I think they were a former graduate. They were affiliated with the program, but are now in like the business sector in town, and they just enjoy doing this. And then they had some other person. But those three people then went through and they had, right, maybe there are 10 candidates that they were looking, those 10 students, and using what the program set out as, okay, these are our hallmarks of making sure our system is operating as it should, all the way from recruitment to completion. They were able to sample and look, right? And then say, oh, we realize that not everybody has their teacher work sample uploaded into Canvas or TaskStream or whatever else it's supposed to be. This is a problem. Or they might find that there's duplication, right, in their process. It's already happening somewhere else. And then report, right, on what did you find? What happened? Were there discrepancies? What improvements are you thinking of making? So let's take a look at a sample internal audit map. So this might give you an idea for your sample of completers where you might kind of dip your toe in for each of them along the way. and what can you learn? And maybe you have some important questions already kind of brewing in your head. I did say, I saw Megan shaking her head about the uploading of work, right? So that you might have some things you already know that you want to make sure you focus in on. And then you have the data, right, my friends, to say to your colleagues, hey, colleagues, we say we're going to do all this, but guess what? We got to do it a little better, or we have to be more consistent, right? So you can start with recruiting. Where did this candidate come from? How did you get them into the program, right? Admissions. Did you make sure that if you said you needed transcripts, did the transcripts actually come through? Did you have your letters of recommendation? If you must have a standardized test score of some type or size or shape, was that put into the file, right? All of those pieces. Sometimes, obviously, there are variances and waivers where those accounted for in that admissions portion. Advising, right? Did they meet all of those advising checkpoints throughout the way? Monitoring, did they, some folks look into the percentage of full and part-time faculty, right? It's important to them that candidates, 60%, I'm making up a number, have full-time faculty versus 40 for coursework. Did that get adhered to? You could look at the diversity of their placements, right? If it's really important that they're in a Title I school, did that happen for every candidate in that early field placement? Their final clinical placement, were the criteria met, meaning were they in with a mentor teacher that was certified in their content area? For some of you, your states are really firm about that, and that's kind of like, that's a no-brainer, right? But perhaps for others, there might be more latitude. And so you're looking at that. You're looking at the hours, right? Did they complete all their hours? The teacher work sample, was that completed, right? Whatever that was. Did they have as many in-person or recorded observations that they were supposed to? Did that happen, right? And then at the end, certain states, right, near the end, like I'm just thinking of New York, right? You need to have your, well, most states, I think, but your fingerprints before you do X, Y, or Z. You need to take a couple of different modules in the state of New York to make sure you can move on and be recommended for licensure. So all of that, whatever is unique to your state in your setting. And then complete your follow-up, right? When did you get their email? How are you following up with them post-graduation? Do you have a plan for that? So these are all the different components of your program, and you're making sure they actually happened. So hopefully that gives you lots of ideas. Remember, you determine this, right? You're determining these elements of your system to make sure that they're operating successfully. Okay, data quality. I know you've all been waiting for this one, I can tell. So you gotta have good, credible data to make your decisions, especially if you decide like, oh, wow, we got to course correct. You want to make sure that that data is actually telling you what you need to know and is reliable for you. So the focus of this program practice is all about how are you investigating your data quality? What are your routines and your practices? And I really want you to think about that as you're telling this story about this is how we attend to our measures, right? Which means we're attending to validity, reliability, and fairness for quantitative measures, and we're attending to trustworthiness and fairness for qualitative measures. We have a great section in our guide that gives you definitions for these things, because oftentimes what we see, and Karen can attest to this, sometimes we see it in our proposals, it's where it begins. But trustworthiness is used by in a layman's term, right? It's not used in the research lens that AAQEP wants providers to aim towards. So please take a look at that. Also, we have a whole workshop, shameless plug, on ensuring data quality and equity. And it digs in, right? You don't have to be a psychometrician. It's not designed for psychometricians. And if you're a small program, you generally don't have one of those folks on staff. But it gives you, I think, practical, pragmatic ways that you can attend to these elements of your measure to increase your confidence. And of course, anybody else, especially those accreditation commissioners, right, that your data are indeed credible. So what does this look like in terms of documentation, right? You want to give folks a picture of how we at Beautiful Valley University attend to our measures. So what does this process look like? What is this timeline or cycle or routine, right? We want to create a culture of continuous improvement, and that means attending to your assessments, right? And how do you do that with your colleagues and your faculty? Also of importance are your stakeholders, right? Thinking about how are they involved and how have you called them out in certain ways? Are you using your advisory board for more than just like, well, hey, here are the results on our licensure test scores, right? How are you taking their professional expertise and using them in being subject matter experts when you think about the validity of your measures? How are you working with your P12 partners? So not only your mentor teachers in classrooms, those principals or other district educators, and using them as you're working on not only the subject matter expertise, but the reliability of your assessments if they're using them to score your candidates, right? So everybody is sharing the same professional definition about what X looks like, right? So share the results of these investigations. That's the data part. So again, a lot of people talk about the process, but they don't get to dig in. And I really want to encourage you to dig in and investigate. Are there disparate outcomes in your measure? Is there an issue with the measure's fairness? It could also be, is there an issue with our inter-rater reliability, right? And digging in. And we know time and time again, right? I'm sure all of you will nod. Your mentor teachers or those that are working as leads for interns, as supervisors, they generally score a bit higher than your university supervisor folks, right? So we know that there's some things, but you might find other things that come out of that, right? And so how can you kind of close that standard deviation just a little bit with that inter-rater reliability work? This is another important part of this work. I'm looking at the bullet and pointing to it, like you can see which one I'm pointing to. Priorities. You can't do this overnight, right? You can't do it all at once. You need to give your rationale of, hey, reader, these are our 7 key measures that we use to inform our program. They tell us really important stuff. And this is how we are going to attend to each of them. We're going to start with our student teaching observation rubric because we have multiple people using that. We've got folks as university supervisors, we have our own faculty use it, and we have our P12 partners. And it tells us a whole bunch of information about our candidates. And oh, by the way, it's part of our process for recommendation. So we better make sure that that measure is locked up tight and we know what's going on with it. So we're starting here. And then we're going to move on to this tool because they just gave us brand new standards. Yay! We have to realign it. So that's our next order of business. But get a timeline. This work can be very overwhelming. And this goes hand in hand with curating your evidence set, right? Any of your measures you're bringing in for standards 1 and 2 need to show up in this program practice work about data quality. So think about that, right? You don't want, I always say you want to arrive alive at the end of writing your self-study. So think about that, lay out your priorities, get a timeline. Don't just say, oh, we're going to do that in spring 25 or what, be more specific. Because again, when you're specific, you're being kind to yourselves and putting everybody on notice, but in a good way within your program of, hey, this is what we said we need to do. And this is how we're going to do it. We have a plan. And it inspires that confidence in the commissioners that you are indeed your program's authority and you are the professional in charge. And this is what we're going to do. And this is how we're going to attend to it. Now, yes, things change, right? But at least if you have a plan, you know that you can flex and pivot from there. And then finally, for your locally developed measures, please make sure you're including links to them. That's important. One note about proprietary measures, often providers will link to those investigations of validity and reliability. That's fine. You still may want to attend to the fairness issue, however, in terms of how have you, if you have that, I'll just use EdTPA or PPAT or whatever it might be, how have you made sure that you've been fair to your candidates as you prepare them to take that? No one just says, oh, hey, candidate Smith, go take the EdTPA now, and you've made no mention of it, right? So always backward map and kind of think about, okay, how have we prepared our candidates so that they will be successful on that proprietary assessment? I've already kind of talked about all of these things, but here are our big data quality terms: validity, reliability, trustworthiness, and fairness. Again, check out the guide, hop on a cohort call, we have tons of accredited members now. I think we're somewhere around 70%. Is that right, Karen? I'm looking at Karen, and I have my numbers. I think it's somewhere about there. She's smiling at me. She hasn't given me the down thumb sign, so I guess I'm on track. But a lot of folks have engaged in this work. Talk with your cohort colleagues that are already accredited. What did you do last time? What would you do differently? How did you explain this? How did you demonstrate this? We've had folks that have done really interesting work and analyses of when they've dug into, especially the fairness of their measures, and are there areas of bias, right? Are those measures actually working well for all candidates? Here's another sample way people might show their work. It's completely up to you. I just, again, want to strongly remind you that when we're looking at our vocabulary around data quality for quantitative measures and qualitative measures, there are distinct differences. So please, please make sure you go to the guide about that as well. All right, so how can you present your data quality work? Well, I've been talking about it, but just a little kind of summary slide here. Give a description of your routines and processes. Debbie Ricky, if any of you know her, she always talks about the rhythm, right? What's the cycle here? That you know, like if Peggy, you won the lottery and you're gone, that your program will keep on keeping on because they have this plan, right? There are routines and processes in place that people can depend on and kind of breathe life to the program and keep cultivating that culture of attending to data quality. Again, give that rationale for how you're prioritizing your work. Provide those details. Timelines are very helpful in how you're going to do things. You might have some measures that you're thinking of just beginning. Maybe you've developed something new, right? I'm thinking especially of our friends in New York. Everybody just developed their own teacher performance assessment, just about. And so there might be some, plans that you have in place for working on some of the elements of data quality. And that's okay. Share what they are and how you're going to do it. I have seen some providers that create what I call like a mini report on each measure. I really liked this approach because I would open it up and it'd be like, our student teaching observation rubric was designed first in 1972. Okay, right? It gives you the history. Or sometimes you're like, it has been here since the institution was founded, or whatever it might be, right? So what's the history? People will talk about the last time it was aligned to the standards, right? Well, we know every 7 years, so we go through and we do a standards alignment. And then just the processes and procedures around it. Like maybe because you have a pretty good crew of mentor teachers and university supervisors, you don't need to do inter-rater reliability work every semester. Maybe you do the big inter-rater reliability work every other year, and maybe you just do reminders, refreshers in between. So whatever that process looks like, go ahead and share it in your most recent investigations. It's also a nice way to kind of pass the torch. I always like to think of succession planning. Think about all the things you wished your predecessor had left you, right, to kind of help bring you on board. I know that sometimes it can be, I don't want to say draining on your time, but it can be a lot of work to put this together. When you think about succession planning, I almost think about that in the way of data quality, like talking about how you lay this out for who's coming next. But it's a gift. So if you have the time to really detail that out for your next person, it's great. So that might be a way you want to go. All right, we're getting here, folks. Oh, this is my favorite. Okay, attending to completer support. All right. This is where you are going to, first of all, you're situating everything in your unique contexts. And you are going to talk about how you are working to support your completers and following up with them. What I love about this is, first of all, this does not mean you have to put your fingerprint on every single completer every year, okay? Some of you have programs where your completers go off to the four corners of the earth. Some of you, you're so fortunate, they all stay like in the 25-mile radius, right? They're all right there. And it's wonderful. And you call on them to be your mentor teachers and to come back and help you with X, Y, and Z, right? So it really just depends. But I do want to say, if the pandemic taught us anything, technology can help squelch some of those limits that geography used to kind of, cause as a barrier. So you can get creative. The other part of this work that I love is that it's a mutually beneficial opportunity, because not only are you supporting these brand new teachers or educators, your principals and superintendents and instructional support staff, but you get to learn from people who are in the actual sandbox to inform your program practice. Like, what are they seeing, right? If you're sitting there teaching your courses to your candidates and you're not getting out for your student teaching observations because you didn't have any assigned to you, how are you going to know what's happening, right? You get this real-time intel, which I love. So how are you supporting your completers in their professional role? How are you maintaining contact with them? And what systems are in place to maximize that contact post-graduation might be things you consider discussing in that documentation. When you think about the documentation, what are the flyers or presentations? Maybe it's attendance, maybe it's social media stats. So I have heard everything from providers keeping repository of lesson plans for completers to a small program where she knew the research interests of every one of her completers. And anytime she found an article, she would ding them and say, hey, I put them in the file, go check out that, right? It could be using social media to create little PLCs for folks. This is especially important. I know it can be really difficult providing support, right? When you're trying to bond, give new teachers some other folks to deal with, not deal with, but to commiserate with and to support one another with in their struggles. You only have one music teacher in a building. Sometimes if it's a small district, there's only one. So how do you use social, right? Your technology, your Facebook groups, Instagram, whatever it might be, to connect folks and help provide support that way, bring them together. So there's lots of different unique things that you can do. Of course, knowing your audience, your own demographic, there's a lot of great, work, right? Your generations, some like Facebook, some rather be on Instagram, right? Some want to be on Twitter. So you've got different things, different tools to help you stay in touch too. All right, there's that one. All right, program capacity supports it all, right? At the end of the day, do you have what you need to make sure that you can keep on keeping on over the interim of the accreditation decision? So right now in standard for this part of program capacity, part of it hits 3A, which is that coherent curriculum. The other is what we're really going to dig into today, the capacity for quality and institutional commitment. So here are the capacity indicators that get spread across 3A and, am I right? Yep, 3F. All right. So you've got your curriculum, you have your qualified faculty, adequate facilities, fiscal support, support services, and means for student feedback. And we'll get into all of these in just a second. So here's a sample curriculum matrix. So you might do this for your courses. You might call out very specific assessments. That's always right. Clear is kind. That's a really nice way. And then go ahead, especially those assessments, right, that you're using for your AAQEP to align, right? So it's just a nice big alignment. Whatever state or national standards that are applicable, obviously that differs by state, it differs by program type. So whatever you're using, you can go ahead and show that alignment, right? Making sure that you're attending to all of those audiences. When we get to faculty qualifications, you want to include those who are in your department and currently teaching your education classes. You don't need those folks outside of your department just teaching a content course. And if you're not sure, ask your dean, because the budget lines, they'll know, they'll tell you. Here's an example of a table that you might use. So you can see you've got your faculty, you might have your part-time or adjuncts that are there, then separated out, and your clinical supervisors, right? That makes sure the people who are doing the observations actually have the background experiences necessary. So you can see everything from their name, we've got rank, if they've got a terminal degree, where it came from, when they got it, what their field, their specialization is. We had one provider where being a nationally board certified teacher was hugely important, and it was one of their requirements for their mentor teachers, right? So that's really important information for that program to have there. What they're normally teaching, the years that they've been with you, other demographics. This is also a way to say, hey, you know, we're really trying to make a change. Our faculty we have a lot of white women on faculty. We want to change this, right? Well, you have it here. What are we doing to move the needle? We know where we're starting, right? It might be some other demographics that you're including there. So this is an A way. This is important to have this organized because your review team is going to come through and say, okay, randomly is going to pick probably 3 of your full-time faculty and 3 of your part-time faculty and say, okay, I see like Dr. Smith is teaching, I don't know, EDUC 276. All right, let me pull that syllabi. So you want to have your course syllabi at the ready, authors. If you don't have them linked in your self-study, it's not the end of the world, but know your team's going to ask for them if you haven't. So be prepared. I would say just have them linked. And then the review team member could say, okay, I'm going to pull Dr. Smith. I'm going to look at this syllabi. Well, it said that, you know, her specialization is in ed leadership. And guess what? She's teaching an ed leadership course. That's great, right? So that's the kind of check that your review teams are going to be making. So again, if you've been through institutional accreditation, you might even already have a bucket full of CVs already hanging out somewhere that you can then attach here, as well as making sure you have all your course syllabi. So CVs and syllabi, important. And I've seen some people even highlight them, hyperlink them into the person's name too. So however you want to get it, but you need to have it. Just be prepared for that. All right. Oh, institutional commitment and support via the parity table. This is fun. I know you're excited about this one. This is where we ask you, right, so that you can make the case that, yes, we have the resources we need to continue on. Or we could use some more resources. And this is a delicate subject, I know, right? Everybody could always use some more. But the point here is, do you have what you need? And if you don't, this is a place where we have seen the Accreditation Commission come down in their decision through a notation with a nod to perhaps resources, right? And then it's on that official action report. So as you dig in, you're going to look at the curriculum, like how many credits, the faculty, like, you know, we have, you know, how many full-time faculty as opposed to part-time faculty, how many courses are they teaching each semester? Maybe it's the advising load as well. The facilities. Do we have enough desks and chairs? Are we equipped with smart boards or whatever it might be? The fiscal support, meaning looking at budget lines. And it might be with salary. So I know sometimes salary, if you have a really small program, that might be, you can't quite get into those weeds, but we have seen where providers will be able to pull out, you know, full-time salary for their faculty and compare to the program to which they're comparing themselves to. Support services and student feedback, you know, what is offered to those candidates? Is it across the board, right? Meaning, is it equitable? And then the ability to provide feedback. What's most important here is the analysis of difference. So if you're a very tiny program, sometimes finding somebody else to compare yourself to in your school or college or within your institution or a similar institution is just not possible. Right? And so then it really is incumbent upon you, because your review team will follow up and ask, if you fill out, I'm going to go back to last slide, you fill out all of your things, right? You're the preparation program. We've got this, we have this many faculty, we have these facilities, they have enough space, whatever it is. You've got to share though, do you have what you need? Right? Because the analysis of difference is what's important. It's not that it's going to be a 1-for-1. Right? But is it equitable in the fact that you have what you need? So going back to this slide, within your school or college is best. Often a program with clinical practice, so nursing often becomes the comparison there for most providers. You might have to take somebody else within your institution, but if you compare yourself to the school of business or engineering or something, they usually have a lot more money than we do in education from other funding sources. So just be mindful of that. And then a similar institution, but your organizational structures are so different at that point, you can do it, but it makes it a little bit more difficult. So, but remember, walk away with, do you have what you need? Right? This is the time where you can really make the case. We've also seen commissioners say, you know what? This was a part-time person who's in charge of this work, and given all of the evidence and documentation the team collected, if you tried to hire another part-time person, they would never be able to fill her shoes because she basically works full-time, but she gets paid part-time. And so that was a way the commission then made that statement that leveraged a full-time position for that program. So just putting that out there for you all. Now, I showed you a couple of sample tables. We have them on our website. You can see them here. They are under the QAR resources page if you navigate that way, but you'll see Word versions of the partnership. There's a partnership table, which I didn't go over today, but that is part of Standard 3. So you might find that interesting and useful for you as you kind of outline the partnerships that you have and the type of placements for your candidates. And then, of course, the tables I shared with you today, the qualifications table for your faculty, your parity table, and the curriculum matrix, they're all Word versions online. So you can use them as is. You can adopt them and adapt them as it fits your program. They're just ways that, to kind of give you some structure should you wish to take advantage of it or not. It's no judgment, no judgment. They're just there as resources. All right, so kind of summing things up. Describe what you're doing, give documentation and evidence. Some folks say, well, if I'm going to say that we have, I'm just going to give a random example, an advisory board that meets, 2 times a year, like, do I have to have minutes from every single meeting or whatever? No, you can give a little sample, like link to 1 or 2, right? So the same thing with flyers, like maybe you're offering completers, you've got some additional seminars you're offering. Share 1 or 2 of what those are. What's the flyer? How are you advertising? You don't have to give every single thing from every single time. That would be overkill and drive you crazy. Keep your reader reading. So link to additional information. So as you're working, maybe you opt for the internal audit and you're sharing, hey, this is the process we went through, this is who we involved, and this is what we found. You would link in your evidence to the audit sheets that were completed for each of those completers, right? You wouldn't put them into the body of your narrative. You could go ahead and link to them, just like you would a full data set. And then share what you've learned, right? What is the point of all of this, right? One, it's to celebrate the good work that you're doing, right? And to make the case that you have candidates that turn into wonderful completers in whatever role that you've prepared them for, right? But what are you learning? What are you going to do next, right? Where have you identified, we're not satisfied this, we want to do better here. So make sure you're sharing that. That's really important as you're digging into your program practices. And with that, thank you for joining us today.